And I've been asked to remind you to put your cell phones on vibrate, something I often forget to do. So if you would, please, that would be helpful. Thank you. Welcome and thank you for being here on this momentous occasion for the Hood College Department of Political Science inaugural Scholar in Residence lecture with the Honorable Mary Robinson. This program event has been long in the making, and we're thrilled to finally have the opportunity to hear a voice of such profound commitment and passion as that of Mary Robinson. Political science is traditionally a discipline that addresses civic engagement, government accountability, distributive justice, legal ethics, and human rights. Mary Robinson not only speaks to these ideas, but she gives them a revitalized spirit and a sublime sense of urgency. Public discourse and political action will change dramatically for all of us who study and think about politics at Hood College. Now, please help me welcome the President of Hood College, Dr. Ron Volpe.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Judson. Thank you. And good evening and welcome to college. Welcome to the campus. We are delighted to have you here. Each and every one of you is indeed a very special person, but I would like to acknowledge a couple of people very quickly. To begin with, our Chair of the Board of Trustees, Cheryl Dreiling, who's also a graduate of Hood. Cheryl, great to have you here. Dr. George Lewis, a member of our Board of Trustees. George, great to have you here. And Dr. Marge Elfin, a former professor here at Hood and now a member of the Board of Trustees. Marge, great to have you here. And it's wonderful to see so many of our Hood students here. We're delighted that you're here, and we're so pleased that you had an opportunity throughout the day to interact with President Robinson. This is something I'm sure you'll remember for the rest of your lives. And it's also great to see a lot of our friends from the Frederick area here, and I want all of you to know that you're always welcome to this campus. We have programming throughout the year, and this is your campus, those of you in the Frederick area. As a matter of fact, I see some familiar faces here. I saw some of you at a lecture last Monday night, and I saw others here Tuesday night at a lecture, and I saw some over here at our lecture on Wednesday, and I see some of you who were here at our Friday gallery opening, and a couple of you were sitting in the rain on Saturday watching the lacrosse game. So you're always welcome here, and we're delighted to have you here. To you students, you know that we say Hood is more than a college, it's a learning community. And the learning goes on constantly here, in the classroom, in the laboratory, in the library, in the computer center, in the dining room, overseas, in your internships, and of course at events like this tonight where we're so fortunate to have truly one of the world's great leaders. So we're delighted that you're all here, and we know you're going to enjoy the program. It's now my privilege to present the Provost and Chief Academic Officer at Hood, who will introduce our speaker, Dr. Kaye Conway. Kate?
Good evening. It's my pleasure to introduce our speaker this evening. For many of us, we've been thinking and anticipating this talk for over a year, and it's a grand day that it has arrived. Mary Robinson is the first woman president of Ireland. She was the founder and former president of Realizing Rights, the Ethical Global Initiative, and also the former UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. She has spent most of her life as a human rights advocate and has worked around the world. A world leader who puts her humanity very much in the forefront of her politics. She also, in 2009, was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the highest civilian honor by President Obama, in recognition of her significant contribution to the nation and the world. She now chairs the Council of Women World Leaders and is president of the Mary Robinson Foundation Climate Justice. Mary Robinson has been named a hero and an icon as one of Time Magazine's 2005 Top 100 Men and Women whose power, talent, and moral example is transforming our world. Mary Robinson is also a member of the Elders, a group of world leaders who contribute their wisdom, their independent leadership, and their integrity in tackling some of the world's most profound and toughest problems, all to try to solve them and make the world a better place. This group of luminaries was founded by Nelson Mandela, and she's a wonderful member of this group. Educated at the University of Dublin, Trinity College, and Harvard Law School, she also holds honorary doctorates from over 40 universities around the world, including Harvard, Yale, Brown, Oxford, Cambridge, and Edinburgh. Continuing her educational experience, she also serves as an extraordinary professor at the University of Pretoria in South Africa, as well as the Council of Goodwill Ambassador and Chancellor of the University of Dublin. It is my pleasure to bring President Robinson up on our stage to greet us this evening.
Thank you very much for that very warm welcome. I must say I've very much enjoyed my visit here to Hood College, and I was glad to learn more at lunchtime about the late Professor Virginia E. Lewis, who made this visit possible, in effect. This morning I met with students in 2 workshops, one on climate justice and human rights, and the other on gender and women's leadership. And tomorrow morning, I look forward to listening to a panel representing those of you, and I know that many of you will be in the audience who will participate, who are active in many different ways at community level in Frederick and beyond, in a social justice panel. So it seems appropriate to reflect on the local and the global. How will we live together in a global village in the 21st century? In some respects, it seems that we are becoming more of a global village. Google has mapped it for us in a totally incredible way, which I don't really understand because I'm an elder. But I know that if I go into Google, I can find my home, my village, the town where I was born, Ballina, the surrounds, the lake. I can find all that now in Google, amazingly, absolutely amazingly. And you can find all kinds of places all over the world that somehow connect us electronically. The news media and the blogosphere cover events happening in real time, events very far away, but we're hearing about them instantly. And even in authoritarian regimes like Syria at the moment, mobile phones take photographs of people protesting in the street, being very courageous in coming out and making their views known. And so we know about violations and repressions much quicker than any other time. It's happening in our time, in our kitchens, in our bedrooms, in our dining rooms, in our communities, in a way that really lets us be aware. During the Arab awakening, we saw and heard much of what was happening, and we rejoiced in the sense of social media being used to create protective spaces so that those who were afraid before were less afraid because they knew through social media, through Facebook and other media, that if they came out, 10 more would come out, maybe 100, maybe 1,000, and that protected them. And we heard all about that, and we were fascinated watching it. On the more negative side, a financial crisis that began in effect in this country with the Lehman Brothers and other collapses affected many parts of the world. And we saw very similar subprime mortgage problems in this country and in Ireland and in a number of other countries. Very similar kinds of problems in the mood of the time, in the exuberance of a wrong kind that was there at the time. In a more light-hearted way, stories or songs or even funny moments or sad moments or nostalgic moments can go viral on the internet. And when they go viral, within minutes, that means an extraordinary number of people are watching the same thing. Hundreds of millions of people within an hour are downloading the same images. They may look at them slightly differently, but it's happening. That strange sense that millions of people, all of a sudden, in a very short space of time, are sharing exactly the same experience. And yet, are we a real village? We have some opportunities and possibilities, but are we a real village? A village, in my sense of it, tends to be a community of neighbours who look out for each other. There's a strong bond holding people together, so that if someone has an accident or a serious illness, then the community, the neighbours, help to farm the field or mind the shop or do what's necessary so that the family will be okay. That's the village. That's the solidarity of a village. We have an Irish word for it in Ireland. It doesn't translate easily into English. It's the word meitheal, M-E-I-T-H-E-A-I-L, and it means linked with the other. And it comes from farming in fields, so that I remember it well when I was going out with my father as a young child. He was a doctor, and we would go out into the rural countryside in County Mayo, and you'd see people coming to a field and the one tractor and labour farming that field, and then they would go the next week to the next field, and if that farmer was sick, his field or her field was done. It was his field generally, was done, was farmed, because that's the way it was. That was the spirit of meitheal. That was the way of doing. So can we say that this spirit of connection and of empathy and of involvement and sense of togetherness is true of our global village? Is there the empathy with others and an engagement to help if necessary that we generally see in village life? I think the global village is becoming bigger by the minute, and that's part of the dynamic. We know, because the UN told us, that during 2011 we reached the 7 billion population. The UN, in that extraordinary way it has, said it had found the 7 billionth child somewhere, and we believe it, and we know it's true. The 6 billionth child, which the UN found 10 years before, 12 years before, is now 12 years old. The 6 billionth child, 12 years old. The 8 billionth child will probably be found in about 18 years. So slightly less than the 12 years, 18 years. It's slowing very slightly, population growth, but only very slightly. And we are told that it's estimated that we will grow to 9+ billion by 2050, the fastest growth in population that the world has ever seen. I want to make the case this evening about why it's so necessary and appropriate, but necessary and urgent, that we find a way to become a global village. To become a global village, which we of course are not yet at. We need to build a sustainable future together so that we can all survive and prosper in peace and in harmony together. The world, as I was saying, for so many reasons, is changing very rapidly. It's changing politically, it's changing technologically, and it may even be changing culturally. In a few months, we will take stock as a world at a major conference in Rio de Janeiro called Rio+20. Rio+20 because, as you'll be aware, it is the conference that marks 20 years from the first Rio conference that gave us Agenda 21 and a number of important treaties, including the Climate Convention. It was an extraordinary moment in time in 1992. It was the first major UN conference, and it drew an extraordinary range of NGOs to talk about the future, but also there was a willingness at government level to take very seriously the need to change. Rio was influenced by the thinking of the Brundtland Commission, the Brundtland Commission entitled Our Common Future, chaired by a fellow elder and good friend of mine, Gro Brundtland. And Our Common Future was about using the resources and the systems of the world in such a way that we pass them in a good standing to the next generation, and they pass it on to the further generations. That we use the resources of the world in a sustainable way and pass them on to the next generation. We've recently had a somewhat similar report from a high-level panel that the United Nations established, which also included participation by Gro Brundtland and many other experts from around the world. And I want to quote 2 paragraphs from that report and give you the title of it. Some of you will know about it, but I would really encourage, especially the students, to look very closely at that report. It's the best preparation for Rio Plus 20. It's much better than the official stuff that is lamentable. But don't quote me. It's not as good as it should be. It's full of UN speak and all kinds of things. But this report is quite good. It's called Resilient People, Resilient Planet, A Future Worth Choosing. So it's not a bad title. And the 2 paragraphs that I want to quote to you are as follows. Today, our planet and our world are experiencing the best of times and the worst of times. The world is experiencing unprecedented prosperity, while the planet is under unprecedented stress. Inequality between the world's rich and poor is growing, and more than 1 billion people still live in poverty. In many countries, there are rising waves of protest, reflecting universal aspirations for a more prosperous, just, and sustainable world. And the second paragraph, a little further down, is, the truth is that sustainable development is fundamentally a question of people's opportunities to influence their future, claim their rights, and voice their concerns. Democratic governance and full respect for human rights are key prerequisites for empowering people to make sustainable choices. The peoples of the world will simply not tolerate continued environmental devastation or the persistent inequality which offends deeply held universal principles of social justice. Citizens will no longer accept governments and corporations breaching their compact with them as custodians of a sustainable future for all. More generally, international, national and local governance across the world must fully embrace the requirements of a sustainable development future, as must civil society and the private sector. At the same time, local communities must be encouraged to participate actively and consistently in conceptualizing, planning and executing sustainability policies. Central to this, listen here students, central to this is including young people in society, in politics and in the economy. So that's the call to arms, if you like, of the current best thinking, most progressive thinking globally on where we need to be, talking about sustainability, talking about the need for a sustainable future that is built on 3 pillars, which we've never brought together properly: economic sustainability, social sustainability, and environmental sustainability. The social sustainability and environmental sustainability are the weak stools. They're almost not there. It's the economic sustainability that is talked about, and the other 2 are not costed in and are not given the same weight. So, coming back to the global village idea, in a village people tend to share the same reference points, the same stories, the same values, the same gossip, the same jokes, and that's what a village is. Is that a problem? Do we not have in our world today enough common values to be able to become a global village? Well, I would dispute that, because it was part of my job for 5 years to promote a small document. This is the battered copy that I carry around always in my, what you Americans call my purse, and I call my handbag. And anyway, I carry it around in that bag. And it is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which a visionary number of people came together to adopt when the world was in crisis. After 2 world wars, Holocaust, the opening up of a Cold War, the dropping of nuclear bombs. All of that had happened. And in 1948, the Commission on Human Rights, chaired by an American distinguished woman, Eleanor Roosevelt, decided that we needed a document that would bring us together on values. I love the story of Eleanor Roosevelt doing that. Again, if students want to read a good book about it, there's a wonderful book called A World Made New. And I'm having an elder moment, I can't remember the author of it, but she was in Harvard. I'm not sure if she still is. But anyway, it's a really good book, A World Made New, that tells the story of how Eleanor Roosevelt bossed and bullied some very distinguished lawyers and delegates from different parts of the world, from China, from the Lebanon, from Canada, from Chile, from France, who were being brought together to work on this document, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And she told them not to write it in UN speak or lawyers' language, because she said very simply, if I don't understand it, how is it going to be understood by people for whom human rights must matter in small places close to home? So write it in as plain English as you can. And it is in relatively plain English for a document of its kind. And I only want to quote 2 articles of it, and only parts of those articles this evening for the purposes of my argument about values for a global village. I think you can really summarize the 30 articles, it's not a long document anyway, the 30 articles of the Universal Declaration in 2 short sentences. One of them, Article 1, the first sentence of it, and the other, almost near the end, Article 29. There are 30 articles. Article 1 begins, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. That's a wonderful village concept. Everyone is born free and equal in dignity and rights. We are engaged. We may not all have the same exact income, but we're born in equality, in dignity and rights. And the second article, Article 29, is a very interesting concept that I don't think we've talked about enough in the international human rights community. It says, everyone has duties to the community in which alone the free and full development of his personality is possible. Now that's my problem with Eleanor Roosevelt. You know, I know it was 1948 and it must be difficult, but she forgot about the gender dimension. And it's all about his and his and his. So I'll read it again and make a her in it, and, you know, that'll be better. Everyone has duties to the community in which alone the free and full development of his or her personality is possible. That's worth thinking about. It actually means that none of us reach the full expression of our personality unless we know that we have duties to the community and have done something about it. Have done something about it. Everyone has duties to the community. So tomorrow I'm going to be talking with those who have done something about it locally, who are engaged with their community. They're on full foursquare with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. They may not have read Article 29, but they're actually doing it. And if you do engage, for those of us who have engaged with community, it is incredibly affirming. when you are engaged in working with people and for them and listening to them and being involved with them, you learn and benefit far more than you give. And anybody who's been doing it knows this. If you give of yourself, you get far more back. It's an extraordinary paradox that we should know more about. The more you give of yourself, the more you get back. The more you are enriched yourself, the more you learn, the more you grow, the more you feel happy, the more you go home and sleep the night because you feel, well, you know, whatever else, I've done my best, I've done my bit. And that is embodied in Article 29 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. As was mentioned, I had the honour to be invited in 2007 to join with Nelson Mandela in his group of leaders that he was bringing together called the Elders. Of course, there's been a high price for that because my husband goes around describing himself as a nurse to one of the elders. And, you know, being an elder is... in fact, if you think of a village, elders are usually respected in the village context. The older people in the village, because it's a village, have that respect. They have the stories, they have the lore, they have the memory, the institutional memory of the village. And when we were brought together, and I remember it very well, in South Africa, and Nelson Mandela himself came to meet with us, and we had our chair, Archbishop Tutu, and Graça Machel, who is a fine woman in her own right, a former Minister of Education in Mozambique, but also married to Nelson Mandela, was there, and Kofi Annan, and Jimmy Carter of this country, and others. When Nelson Mandela spoke to us, he used very simple language, very compelling language. He told us to be humble. He told us, when you go to a place, don't think that you have all the answers. People locally know more about things than you would ever know coming in from the outside. So the first thing you must do is listen. Listen carefully, and then see, when you've listened, what you can do to support the issues that they care about. And I was very aware of that in the recent work that we've been doing with the elders. We've worked on a number of difficult country situations. Indeed, Kofi Annan is one of the elders, but he has recused himself. He has stepped aside from the elders in the short term to deal with Syria. And that's kind of typical of the sort of situations that the elders try to deal with. Various conflicts in Africa, various North Korea. We were in North Korea, four of us, about a year ago, looking at the situation there and trying to reduce the tension arising from a possible nuclear threat by North Korea. But we also try to address more global problems, and one of the issues that we put particular emphasis on was to address the way in which, in our world, religion and tradition are sometimes misused and abused and misinterpreted to subjugate women. And we know that this can be a very real problem in different religions in different parts of the world, different fundamentalist tendencies in different religions, on all kinds of issues. Sometimes it's issues of child marriage, genital cutting. Sometimes it's issues of access to family planning, access to reproductive health. So in different parts of the world, fundamentalist tendencies are there, and we have sought to address them. And we have very strong statements on the website of the Elders, which is www.theelders.org for those who want to look at what we're doing. And we were addressing child marriage, which many people know is a problem, but I think completely underestimate the extent of the problem. It's estimated that about 10 million girls a year marry way below the age when they're capable of fulfilling marriage or should be asked to do so. 10 million a year is 100 million in a decade who are married at 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, way before their bodies or their minds should be contemplating being married. And there are various reasons for that: poverty, family pride, making sure that the girl will not be in any relationship once she becomes sexually potentially active in any way that would shame the family, and so on. And we have realized the importance of engaging with that issue. And the reason I mentioned it is that once we started becoming involved, it became an issue of a global partnership. There's a huge partnership globally now on child marriage called Girls Not Brides. And it's active in India, in Ethiopia, in Pakistan, in Bangladesh, in various parts of Africa, where the highest prevalence of child marriage is actually in Niger in Africa, even though the highest numbers are in countries like India with a very big population. And it was an opportunity to see that when you engage in an issue with good partners who are working and have been working locally but separately on an issue, you can help to bring that together. You can help to create a sort of effective synergy and partnership on the issue that can be really important. I want to build into my idea of the global village what I think is the biggest threat to that village, which we haven't yet created well. It's also a strong and urgent reason why we would try to be more aware of living together in this world in a village context. And that is the impact of climate change on our world, and in particular on the more vulnerable parts of the world. I didn't come to this issue as an environmental expert or a climate scientist. That's a learning curve that I'm enjoying. It's very good as an elder to be learning as much as I am. Students, there's no end to the learning you can do in life. I'm in a steep learning curve, which I'm enjoying very much. And by the day, I'm learning new things that I should know and need to know in order to even speak to an audience like this about climate. I know that in the United States, there tends to be a lot of skepticism about climate. And I'm really aware that this is not a totally benign environment. There's a lot of lobbying by those who have an interest in ensuring that we deny climate change, the lobbies of the oil and gas and coal companies. And that is very real, and a lot of money is poured into ensuring that at least the argument is muddied and we don't look at it clearly. Speaking from the perspective of spending a lot of time with poor communities in African countries and increasingly now in Bangladesh and other places, climate change is real and happening and hurting. It's hurting communities, it's hurting indigenous farmers, it's hurting the fact that there are no seasons to know when to sow and to harvest, long periods of drought, flooding, etc. And the scientists are so overwhelmingly on the side of pointing to dangerous tipping points on climate that everything I have read persuades me that it is really not anymore something you can argue about. If anybody responsibly looks at the evidence, yes, it is happening. And then you look at what is happening and you see it happening. You see the way in which poor communities are already having to adjust. You see that the United States in the last year had the largest number ever of hurricanes and other catastrophes, over $1 billion. And so these climate shocks are affecting this country, which is a climate resilient country. You've got lots of ways of coping even with serious climate shocks. But when it happens in poor countries, they don't have insurance, they don't have any plan B, and they are devastated by what's happening. And it is happening increasingly. So in our village, the stresses are really beginning to show. They are beginning to show even in movement of peoples. With the students earlier today, I was talking about a friend of mine who brings this home to me in very personal terms, Ursula Rakova, who's in the Cataract Islands in the Pacific, who is moving 1,500 people, her people, from a small island which is going underwater to Bougainville in Papua New Guinea, where the people there are willing to share some of their land. But it has to be negotiated. First of all, she has to negotiate with the people of Bougainville that this new group of 1,500 people will come, strangers, into their midst. Secondly, what land will they have and where will it be and how will they own it and what will it be about? And thirdly, her sadness in the fact that as an indigenous people, they've had to abandon, or in the process of abandoning, the land of the bones of their ancestors. That incredible link that indigenous people have with where their ancestors are buried, the spiritual connection with the soil, that deep indigenous link, and it's going and gone for them and will be gone for many other islands as the climate makes things worse and affects us. So we have a world under stress, and we need to somehow think about that in very human terms. I sometimes wonder why we haven't been alerted to this earlier. I call it very much the climate justice approach, and discussed it with the students earlier. Climate justice simply connects human rights, right to development, and the impact of climate change, which is undermining the development of poor countries, and they're not responsible. The 50 poorest countries in the world are responsible for less than 1% of these greenhouse gas emissions. The whole of Africa, the whole continent of Africa, is responsible for less than 4%. And yet these are the areas where the major negative impact of climate is being felt, and where there aren't the supports, there isn't the resilience and the plan B that you have in other countries. And this is going to get worse. We are at the moment not on course for a safe world. We're on course for probably 4 degrees Celsius, which, if you look at the scenarios for 4 degrees, is absolutely horrific. It will mean 200 million climate refugees by 2050 and many other negative aspects. So I try to make these things simple for myself and to communicate them to an audience. There may be some of you in this audience who are very sophisticated in understanding the issues, but for me it helps to think of an anniversary like we're marking this year, the 100th anniversary of the Titanic. It's an event that we all think about in different ways, and there have been Hollywood films about the Titanic, and so we all more or less know what happened in 1912. And it's very much commemorated in Ireland. The Titanic was built in Belfast, and they've actually built a hugely sophisticated modern museum in Belfast about the Titanic. So I'd encourage any of you heading for the island of Ireland, go and see the museum. I haven't seen it myself yet, but it looks great in photographs. And in a tiny village very close to where I was born and where my permanent home is, where I call home, in County Mayo, in the village of Lahardane, it is the Titanic Village of Ireland. There's a little sign as you go into the village that's been put up a couple of months ago, because they want to be recognised as a village that lost so much in the Titanic. 14 people from that village died in the Titanic. And if you think of 1912 and this tiny village in the poorest part of Ireland, what it must have cost each of those 14 to raise the money to travel to Cove and then get on the lowest steerage possible on the Titanic, with the huge sense of adventure, of getting money for the family, America, the dream, the huge possibilities that were in their minds and their hearts when they left. And I kind of have a sense that at the moment, Mother Earth, our planet, is like the Titanic. We're heading for an iceberg of climate change. of the real impacts of climate change. At 4 degrees Celsius, we will not have a safe world, not for anyone, not for anyone who thinks they're immune at the moment. And this would be somewhere beyond 2050. But my 4 grandchildren will be in their 40s in 2050, so that's not so far away. That's within my care about what's happening. And many of us would be in the same situation in this room. And we're really heading for that Titanic, that climate overuse of fossil fuel. Why are we heading for it? Because not only is this country overusing its carbon budget, but China is moving into huge middle class that want fridges and cars and things. India is moving into huge climate middle class that wants fridges and cars and things. Brazil is moving into huge middle class that want, and we cannot have a world that supports this. And we haven't understood the implications of it. And if Titanic Earth hits that iceberg, nobody is safe. It's not the poorest that I've been talking about, the poor indigenous farmers, the poor who don't know when to sow because they've now got drought and prolonged flooding and have no insurance. Nobody will be safe. And it's interesting to me that somehow this just isn't factored in. It shows the huge power of the media fed by the fossil fuel companies, the very major companies, oil companies, gas companies, companies that are pouring money into denying that this is possible so that they can continue in the old ways. And as I say, some of you will be more expert than I am on this, but I have listened enough to the science. I've looked at it very seriously. I spent a couple of days recently with one of the greatest climate scientists in the country. Well, actually he's Mexican, but he does also advise President Obama and the current administration, Mario Molina. He's a Nobel Prize winner, a brilliant scientist, and listening to him, I am convinced that we need to understand that we are in a world very like the world that Eleanor Roosevelt was dealing with. That was a world that had seen 2 world wars, a Holocaust, a Cold War opening up, dropping of nuclear bombs, and they found the possibility to work on values together, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, a visionary values for the world. We have to dig deep and find that we also need to find values together. So what is the way forward? I believe it would help enormously if we could change the conversation on climate change and make it a true global village conversation. Global village conversation. And if it were, the conversation would go something like this. That's what happens in villages, in whatever languages we were talking about. Okay, we're all in this together. We're all in this fix together. Some of us have more resources than others, but basically none of us can have a livable world if we don't act together. So we need to be a bit more creative now. We're up against something quite urgent, but we're doing it together. We need to see, how do we decide on what is fair? How do we decide on what is fair for the poorest millions in the world to have a right to development? If it's going to be a fossil fuel development, that's very dangerous, and it's not the best development for them anyway. But they have an option now of renewable energy development. So why couldn't we start thinking about the fact that the research is there, the knowledge is there. Even for the very poorest, you have clean cook stoves now, and the UN Foundation is trying to ensure that they get out to about 1 million people this year and maybe 20 million by 2020. 20 million out of a 2.7 billion who cook on animal dung and charcoal and firewood, and who ingest fumes internally as they do and have great health risks, is not a big ambition. Since we have the technology, and I'm speaking particularly to the young people now, why should we say 20 million by 2020. I'm not really impressed by that. 2.7 billion people urgently need clean cook stoves. What's stopping us? That's a market, that's possibilities, that's jobs, that's... what about the 1.4 billion who have no light in the home except kerosene and candles, which are dangerous? I've spent quite a lot of time in African countries. I've talked to my friends, African women and men who have mobile phones. When they invite me into their home, I can't see anything because it's not lit. And they don't have light in the home. And yet solar batteries are becoming increasingly cheap. Solar methods of lighting are becoming available, and they also can do mobile phones. So why don't we, as a village, say, we have a real problem here. We've got to get from A to B. We've got to make sure that we move much more dramatically and together and in a way that acknowledges a need for fairness but moves to harness the sun. The sun actually, I wish the sun shone more in Ireland. You know, we have too much rain. But the sun shines magnificently in Africa. Every time I go there, I have to put on this cream and watch my Irish skin and keep out of the sun. Huge energy potential, and yet it hasn't been harnessed to provide productive energy for poor people that could take them out of poverty in a way that was sustainable and safe. Wind power, wave power, biomass, all of these are there with the potential for greater jobs and to save us all. I believe that the creativity of young people is never going to be more necessary than it is in our world today. First of all, young people have a different perspective to many of us. This is their world, and they're the ones who are going to bear the burden and the brunt of it. And I'm finding in Ireland that there's an increasingly young awareness. We have good green schools in Ireland. We have young scientists in their 12, 13, 14 who are educating their parents. There's a kind of reverse education going on. It's children who are saying to their parents, "Don't you know? You should be alert to this. This is our future. We're going to be alive in 2050 and beyond. Do you know what kind of world they're saying we're going to have?" I've been reading in Google. I've been, and they're really in touch with the kind of threat of this. And most of all, I come back to a human factor that is so important in village life, and you see it in village life, and you probably see it in a city the size of Frederick is small enough to have this very precious thing. It's a thing called empathy. Empathy with others, a feeling of identification. It's so strong in villages because people know each other and know the situation and relate to it. We need to develop an empathy within the global village. And that empathy has to be one that can think intergenerationally. We have to somehow, in changing the conversation, say what we do now is going to affect generations to come. So we have to factor in that we need to eat less meat, we need to reduce, reuse, recycle, we need to have our buildings be more energy efficient, we need to move hugely to renewables, not because of our immediate needs now, not the short-termism of average politics, the 1 to 5 years at most that politicians think about, but intergenerationally. And that's going to be a big shift, but a necessary shift in our thinking. I think probably it'll come more from pension schemes and others talking about it. I'm going to throw out to you something that I've been pondering recently because it's been discussed in a very serious way, and that is the problem of stranded assets. For those of you who are knowledgeable about economics, stranded assets is a known term. Asbestos is a stranded asset. It's become so dangerous that nobody will use it. And when the ozone layer was declared to be something that we urgently needed to deal with, then the chemicals that were harming the ozone layer became stranded acids. Many people are beginning to think now that coal and gas and oil are becoming stranded acids. We will not be able to use the reserves of coal and gas and oil that are potentially there, and shale oil and all this new technologies that they're talking about. Because if we do, we will not have a safe world. If we do, we will not have a livable world. So we're going to be in a very different situation. I see you all looking at me somewhat anxiously, and you're not happy with what I'm saying, but think about it. Think about oil companies that have on their books that they have reserves of oil and gas they can bring on stream. But if they bring them on stream, we will go above 2 degrees Celsius. At the moment, we're not on target for 2 degrees Celsius. The world has said at the conference of the parties in Cancun, a commitment globally in the UN that we have to stay below 2 degrees Celsius to have a safe world, 2 degrees Celsius above industrial standards. And that's accepted by the vast majority of scientists and politicians worldwide to keep us safe. We're not on course. We're on course for something close to 4 degrees, which is disastrous, but we say we'll get better. But when are we going to get better? When are we going to start thinking about getting better? When are we going to get real? When are we going to be a village? When are we going to have this sense of empathy? So my message is, at one stage, it's a kind of warning, Cassandra-like almost, about how serious the situation is. The other side of it is the opportunities, and those opportunities are so real. I believe that there is an enormous opportunity to change poverty in the world. Somehow, in the Millennium Declaration and the Millennium Development Goals in the year 2000, we forgot one thing, which was that access to energy should have been a primary Millennium Development Goal. And I'm not even talking at that stage about access to affordable renewable energy. I'm talking about access to usable energy, oil and gas initially, for poor communities. But now we're talking about renewable energy, the fact that we have solar, wind, biogas, wave power, which will make a huge difference. So bringing all this together in Roosevelt's terms, and this is really in conclusion because I'd love to hear your views. Some of you are looking a bit shell-shocked at the moment, so I really would like to hear your views. Eleanor Roosevelt, when she was talking about this Universal Declaration of Human Rights about 10 years after it was adopted, said some very important things. And I'm not going to paraphrase her completely, but you'll, I think, hear the echo of something you've heard before. Where, after all, do human rights begin? In small places close to home, so small that you cannot find them on maps of the world. But they are the world of the ordinary person in his, and she goes on in a rather his rather than her, his and her factory and farm and so on. And what will make the difference? What is the necessary component that will ensure that human rights are more real? It is citizen action. It is what we'll be talking about tomorrow morning. It is engagement. It is that principle that everybody can make a difference. It's what you see in a village, that those that are stronger engage and step up to the plate and are there, and are those who carry the village. And they do it very often without wanting any praise or recognition. They do it just because that's what you do in a village. And I think we need to remind ourselves that we do have those common values and that they are very relevant to the issues that we're addressing. They're very relevant to climate justice because it brings them together. It brings together development, including the right to development of poor countries and poor peoples, and human rights, and the impact of climate change, and the possibilities of a world which is engaged in fast-tracking to the renewing of its energies and its sources of power in such a way that we can have a future which is not a future of doom and gloom, but a future actually of much safer and hopefully more peaceful and secure possibilities for all of the people in the world, and less divisiveness in the world. Sometimes when I'm talking in very serious terms about a subject, as I was saying to the students earlier, I reach for Irish poets and poetry. And Seamus Heaney is a good friend of mine, and he wrote a poem that is very relevant to understanding human rights in our world. And it's one that I would certainly encourage the students present to think about. It's called From the Republic of Conscience. And Seamus wrote it for Amnesty International for the 40th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which would have been in 78. And he gifted it to Amnesty. And it's a poem about somebody who travels to the Republic of Conscience. And as they go, their creeping privilege disappears. They carry their own luggage, their arms are at the one length, and then they arrive at the Republic of Conscience, and they have a kind of spiritual experience. And when they come back, the old man looks into his face and says, "Now you have become a dual citizen." Their embassies are everywhere, he said, and no ambassador would ever be relieved. So you make that journey to the Republic of Conscience. You have this engagement. In this context, I would say the engagement this evening is that we have to become a global village. And then you come back and you are a dual citizen. So you are a United States citizen and you are a citizen of conscience. You are a dual citizen, and no ambassador would ever be relieved. So it's a lifelong sentence. There is no escape. We all have to be citizens of conscience. Thank you for being a great audience. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. A wonderful speech. We'd like to take questions. President Robinson would like to take some questions, and we've set up 4 microphones. Dr. Eager, where are my colleagues? Dr. Tucker Warks, Dr. Robinson, and Susan Day.
There's a bonus for the first question. No?
Oh, really? I'm Travis Gilbert. I'm a freshman here at Hood. We were talking about how these developing countries are going down the same path as America had, and how this capitalist society often, the demands of it, and this capitalism is a lot of times hampered by short-term goals and, you know, get money fast. What role does capitalism play in eliminating this environmental problem and these poverty gaps between countries, since it often does, especially in this country, hamper meeting certain goals or setting the standard very high?
Okay, thank you for the question. I wasn't primarily focused, and it's a sort of slightly different subject, but it's a very legitimate question on, you know, financial theories and capitalism. What I was saying is that there's a great pressure on large emerging economies like China, India, Brazil, South Africa, because they are becoming big polluters, big emitters of greenhouse gas emissions. But they also have large numbers of very poor people, hundreds of millions of very poor people. And those people aspire to what we've all aspired to, the fridge and the other machines and the car and the rest of it. And if they are going to go exactly the same route, they have a right to development. They have a right to those things, but if we don't make those things based on renewable energy, then we're very unlikely to meet any targets for a safe world. We're already off course. And with the population increase that we're envisaging, it's the fastest population increase we've ever seen in the world. So I wasn't primarily looking at the economic rationale other than the short-termism of the current stock market, the current capitalist system is looking for results every quarter. And that's not thinking in terms of the intergenerational impact. I think your question is a very legitimate one, but probably requires a better answer on a different occasion, a deeper answer. Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
How do you respond to the argument that the Declaration of Human Rights is based on a Western notion of the individual? There are so many societies in the world in which people find their identity in the extended family or the tribe or the past. How do you answer that argument?
Thank you. That's a lovely question. Yes, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is based on the individual, and I stand over that, but it's not the complete picture. We have a world that hasn't connected different opportunities for values. And I didn't deal with this very well in what I was saying, so your question lets me deal with it. Let me deal with it in terms of world conferences. I mentioned the Rio conference in 1992, which was on the environment. And if you look at Agenda 21 and the other documents, there's no reference to human rights. The following year in Vienna, we had the World Conference on Human Rights. And if you look at that whole Declaration Plan of Action of Vienna, you don't find any reference to the environment. But in the Johannesburg conference 10 years ago on development, sort of sustainable development, much like what we're going to be talking about in Rio, they did try to make a connection. And actually, there was a banner headline in Johannesburg, no sustainable development without human rights. Now we're moving to yet another important step in Rio, if we can do this, which says, and I believe this firmly, that sustainable development has three pillars. If you like, it's a three-legged stool. And the three legs are economic sustainability, social sustainability, and environmental sustainability. And if we put those three with equal priority and cost them, we would have a very different approach, and it would be a much better value system. And it would add to and augment the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which doesn't adequately deal with this. Yeah.
Dr. Tucker Works.
2009 conference on
Speak into your mic.
on climate change was held in Copenhagen, and many saw it as a failure. And I know that Rio Plus 20 is a conference of sustainable development, but do you think that the same might happen again? The countries who traditionally are not the backers of such resolutions, such as the United States and China, Brazil, and South Africa, might again come up with a resolution that will not be supported by many other countries or organizations.
I would agree with you that the conference in Copenhagen was a failure because there were such high expectations beforehand that there would be a real breakthrough and a climate agreement. And that didn't happen. We did get the Copenhagen Accords, but they were outside the formal system. Since then, in a more modest way, under Mexican leadership in Cancun, things were brought within the UN system again. And in South Africa, in Durban last December, we had a moderate success. The Kyoto Protocol has been continued by the European Union and a few other countries, sadly not Canada, which is in gross breach of its obligations, but that's another matter. When I'm in Canada, I'll speak more openly about that. The Durban Platform for Enhanced Action on Climate says we now have an agreement between all countries. We're going to work towards a climate agreement that all countries, the United States, China, and everybody else, will be in by 2015. If we can achieve that, and it'll be hard, we will move to a different place. And it is possible, because countries are waking up. This country is waking up, and other countries are waking up. The tide is slightly turning. After Copenhagen, the tide turned towards skepticism. It's turning back now. and people are really understanding that we're reaching tipping points faster than we thought, that this is not a safe situation and we need to deal with it. And I think that that's going to make a big difference.
Susan?
Ma'am, how would you counter the argument by countries such as Brazil, China, and India, vis-a-vis fossil fuel consumption, that industrialized nations such as Great Britain and the United States have had their heyday, as it were, in terms of economic benefits, and that this is simply the opportunity for these nations to have a chance, as it were, to grab the gold ring for their people?
Yeah, that's very much the argument that is made. We have a right to development. We have very poor peoples. They want to have these, opportunities for the fridges and the cars and the gadgets in the home that other countries have, etc. And it's our turn, and we want our right to development. And I think the answer, if we're talking in a global village context, is you have a right to development. In fact, it's very much part of international human rights. We've marked the 25th anniversary of the Declaration on Right to Development. But it's not in the interests of a safe world for anyone, rich or poor country, that you exercise that right to development in the old-fashioned fossil fuel way that we did. There is another way, which is renewable energy, in which you can have those gadgets. And we have to fast-track how you get there. China is already investing hugely in this, is probably becoming the world leader on renewables. And the United States, hopefully, will wake up that this competitive advantage is going to pass them by very shortly if the United States, and it is moving in that direction. But we cannot say to large populations in poor countries, you don't have the right to develop in the foolish way we did. They have the right to develop in the foolish way we did, but nobody will have a safe world. So it's as much in our interests as in their interests that we engage in a global village way to resolve that by a lot of transfer of technology, a lot of discussion of how poor countries with their large numbers of poor people who are coming into middle class can avail of growth without fossil fuel. We have to de-link growth and fossil fuel.
Thank you, Dr. Eater.
Good evening, President Robinson. My question is in regards to a speech that you made in January to the University County Court about your expressed wish to see Ireland emerge as one of the leaders in climate justice. I was wondering if you might be able to inform us of any domestic policies that Ireland has implemented so that we as other citizens of the global village can learn from.
Oh, thank you for that question. I wish I could give you a more positive answer. We're working on it. Ireland hasn't been as good on climate as we should be because, like many parts of the United States, we have a big agricultural sector, and agriculture is pretty polluting, as we know, especially beef and dairy agriculture. So that's a big part of our problem and how to move towards a more climate-smart agriculture. I think there's a great awareness, particularly we have very good green schools in Ireland. We have very good young scientists who are making the argument now. It's amazing to me that 20 and 21-year-olds are actually making the strongest arguments far more fluently because they know the science than I'm making them. They really are understanding the situation, and that is influencing. The government in Ireland is committed to bringing in climate legislation. I keep reminding the government that there is a small country near us that is where we aspire to be, and that is Scotland. Scotland has very good climate legislation, is developing renewables and creating jobs. That is, I'm watching a member of the consulate from Washington DC, or the Irish Embassy in Washington DC, listening to me, and he's nodding at least, or half nodding. It's very interesting. Scotland actually is where I hope Ireland will be in the next couple of years, benefiting from the jobs that come with a focus on renewables and reaching out in a climate justice way. They're doing work with the Maldives, for example, on wave power. and they're really making their approach to climate seamless. We will get our jobs from renewables, but we know we have to reach out in a village way, a global village way, to the developing world.
Dr. Robinson, question?
Now, when I get a question for Dr. Robinson...
That's right. Dr. Robinson.
Oh, sorry, no, that's... okay.
Same name.
A couple of weeks I'm participating in a United Nations conference on climate change, and I was wondering what your opinions were on the effectiveness of the Kyoto Protocol, the Washington Declaration, and the other steps taken to attempt to end the holes that we have gashed in the environment, and what we can do to bring in major members of the global community, such as Russia, China, and especially the United States, into solving the issues that we've caused in the environmental incidents.
Well, let me put it this way. Your question enables me to maybe respond by reflecting on what happened in Durban. What happened politically that was so different from Copenhagen. I mean, we were asked a question about the failure of Copenhagen. In Copenhagen, it was expected that the big countries, particularly China and the United States, often called the G2, and the BRICS, the big emerging, would come together in a better way. And it didn't quite happen like that, and the EU was outside. And eventually, at the last minute, the United States did get into the room where some kind of agreement was being forged, and that was the Copenhagen Accords. In Durban, it was exactly the opposite in many ways that happened politically. Who wanted a climate agreement? The European Union. Why? Because they've committed to Kyoto, and they don't want to be the only ones. They want the BRICS and the United States and those other countries, Japan, Canada, etc., to be part of a climate agreement, because they were continuing, if they were going to continue, the Kyoto Protocol with the few countries, Switzerland, Norway, possibly Australia, a few other countries that were going to continue with Kyoto. So that was the European Union. Who else wanted a climate agreement? The smallest, poorest countries, the least developed countries. Who else wanted a climate agreement? The small island states that are going under. So an agreement was forged in Durban between the European Union, the least developed countries, and the small island states. And they found that they had 120 countries of the delegations who were agreed that we should commit to a new climate agreement. And then South Africa said, well, we can't be outside this tent. You know, this conference is taking place in South Africa. Most of these countries are our African brothers and sisters, so we have to be in. And then Brazil said, oh, well, we can't be outside this. I mean, we have to be in as well. And then India said, well, and China said, well, if everybody else is in, we'll be in. And the last one in was the United States. So it was a real tail wagging the dog kind of situation. And it's weak for that reason, because it wasn't a power decision. But there is the Durban platform for enhanced action, where there was consensus that countries said we need to have a climate agreement that all countries will participate in. Kyoto will continue in the interim, but not as a long-term solution. And we need an agreement that will be fair, with common but differentiated responsibilities, with equity, with some way of identifying how we address right to development in a fair way. And that's what's being committed to, and that's what my foundation is very focused on. How do we then deal with the equity issues in that context?
Dr. Tucker-Wards.
Good evening, Anna.
Hi.
You've spoken about the possible international climate change human rights litigation via the World Trade Organization. Some have taken it a step further and called for an international environmental court. What are your thoughts?
Well, any issue like that, I would welcome. Any kind of way of taking stock or documenting what's going on, anything like that is helpful. And the more thorough it is, the better. Anything that will remind us that the clock is ticking and that we're not in a safe place and we're not moving towards a safe trajectory. We're off course. How do we get back on course? And that means new thinking and more rigorous thinking. So any measures that would help in that would be very welcome.
We have time for just one more. Susan?
First, I'd just like to take a few quick comments. Thank you. You're probably the most influential person I've ever met so far in my life. And second off, the other comment was, I really agree with your comment that the youth, like us college kids, that we are the next changing element in this world. And it's my belief, I'm a senior social work major, and I've done a lot of research with poverty and homelessness, and it's my belief that that we as young people, and even the young at heart that are here, that we are the first generation. Listen to this. We are the first generation that has the power and the potential to end poverty, and that's just my belief. So
that's a wonderful statement to end this evening. I totally agree with you. Right on.
Dr. Volpe?
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much again, President Robinson, for traveling to Frederick, to being part of us here at Hood. You are a friend now for life, so we can invite you back very soon. We're delighted that you're here. And thank you also for making today a very historic day in the life of Hood College. Your remarks will be well remembered for many, many years to come. Also, with the great support from our Board of Trustees, in recognition of your life of service and your commitment to those who are in great need, it's my privilege to present to you the Hood College Presidential Seal for your commitment to social justice for all. Congratulations.